Ain't you ever seen my act? Well, I'm creeping along in the dark. My eyes is crafty. My pockets is bulging. I'm loaded, armed to the teeth, with leaflets. And am I quick on the draw? I come up to you, very slow, very snaky, and with one fell gesture, I tuck a leaflet into your hand. And then, 1, 2, 3, there's a riot. You're the riot. I incited you. I'm terrific, I am. The cradle will rock.
The Cradle Will Rock, the title and the message of Marc Blitzstein's famous play about the labor movement and the fabric of American life back in the 1930s. Marc Blitzstein wrote the music and the words for The Cradle Will Rock in 5 blinding weeks in 1936, and he offered it to Broadway and found no takers. But in 1937, it was produced by Orson Welles and John Houseman for the WPA Federal Theater Project. And it had its debut in June of 1937 in what must go down in theatrical history as one of the most spectacular and highly unorthodox openings in the entire history of the New York theater. Today on Camera 3, we are going to see a few excerpts from a bright new revival of The Cradle Will Rock, which is currently playing at Theater 4 on West 55th Street under the direction of our guest on Camera 3 today, the well-known actor-director Howard da Silva.
Hello, Jim.
And if I remember correctly, Howard, you were the Larry Furman, the hero of the original Cradle Will Rock.
One of the most exciting moments in my life was that opening on June the 16th, 1937. It was marvelous.
Well, we want to go into that. What was the background of the play itself?
Well, what my daughters, my 11 and 13-year-old daughters, called the good olden days, 1937, FDR had been re-elected for a second time. The unions, a big union drive, organizing unions, and in opposition to that, quite a bit of hardship. For example, there was the Republic strike in Chicago, and the workers who were attempting to organize the unions there were shot down. It was known as the Chicago Massacre. Those were vital times. Some people have called them an age of confidence. The vital 30s.
Yeah, they always have to have a bright adjective for any decade, and you could find a lot of them for the 1930s. But the theme of The Cradle Will Rock was not limited to any one decade.
I quite agree.
Good deal more lasting.
I think so. Its springboard was the 30s, but it spoke about things that were much more long-lasting. The whole question of prostitution. Although the springboard was the thing of a particular prostitute in a particular area, he spoke about prostituting one's basic principles. And those, as far as I can see, are lasting, and I think audiences find them lasting today.
The question of human integrity.
That's correct.
And yet, if you consider The Cradle Will Rock as an overall play with music, or play in music,
as Marc called it,
as Blitzstein called it, there is humor as well as bitterness and conflict in the play.
There's a great deal of delightful humor. One of the most engaging of the scenes in it concerns 2 artists, a painter and a musician, Yasha and Dauber, who are dependent upon their mentor, Mrs. Mister, and the scene is a hotel lobby as they wait for her appearance.
Well, we'll turn to Yasha and Dauber and Mrs. Mister.
Well, if it isn't my old friend Dauber, the artist. Well, if it isn't my old friend Yasha, the violinist. He has to be here today. Of all the people who walk into a hotel lobby, I meet him. How's the concert business? Fine. How's the painting business? I had 30 concerts last year. Last year? I sold 12 pictures last year. How about this year? This year, I rely on my talent. Prospects are lousy for me, too. Don't let me keep you, please be on your way. You must have many things to do. No, not at all. An appointment today brings me to these parts. Me too. But the
person I'm about to meet, I doubt you could have met her. The kind who grovels at my feet, she'd stay there if I let her. She's fabulously wealthy, and although that's not the reason, I think she can be counted on to subsidize me all next season.
Your lady friend does resemble a lot someone, and that's very queer. So, someone who's meeting me here.
No.
Is her Pissarro light blue?
Yes.
Not Mrs. Mister.
Well, yes, Mrs. Mister.
Me too. Oh, there's something so damn low about the rich. They're fantastic. They're far-fetched. They're just funny. They've no impulse, no fine feeling, no great itch.
What have they got?
What have they got? What have they got?
Money.
Stupid woman, Mrs. Mister.
Stupid, but she doesn't know about music would put Heifetz back on his feet again.
She asked me to bring El Greco to tea this summer.
This summer? Oh, so she mentioned this summer to you. Did she say where she will be?
No, but we both thought that Paris would do. Or Capri. She called it Capri.
Why, she promised me Bar Harbor with an extra house where I... But of course, if she has other plans, I've other fish to fry.
Well, dear Lady Duchess desperately wants me at her place. She said everyone do her 3/4. I'm to do full pay.
And I just heard from Marquesa Contessa last week. She was Matilda McGee.
Well,
Now she's divorced the Marquis.
hell, my Lady Duchess loves me.
Swell.
But to wed well, so I fear would affect my career.
I agree.
Oh, there's something so damn low about the rich. It's incredible, the open way they court you. All these millionaires, I can't tell which is which. What can they do?
What can they do?
What can they do?
Support you.
There you are, you two. And together. Who says I haven't brought about a union of the arts? Painting and music. Twin flowers from one stem. The spirit. Yasha, those horns are perfect. Imagine he went and had the horns of my Pierce Arrow tuned to that motif from Beethoven's Egmont Overture. You know, ta-ta, ta-ta-ta, ta-ta-ta, yoo-hoo. Oh, Dauber, I had an argument at lunch today with Hallie Vacuum whether Picasso has curly hair. Oh, now, don't tell me. I couldn't bear it if he was bald. Oh, the weekend. You're both coming to me for the weekend.
Oh, yes.
Ask us again and again, Mrs. Mister. Ask us again. We love it, please, now and then. Just ask us again. Whenever it's convenient, we'll come. When it's not, we're always lenient. Unless you found some other bum, for we love to sit in the lap of your lush and lavish display. Although it's only from Friday night till Sunday. Your guests are disgusting. Your food is too heavy. We eat and we drink and we belch and we're full and we're ill and we're bored.
These boys will kill me.
But we live off the fat of the land. And for service we don't lift a hand. We're allowed to be rude and insulting and lewd. So long may you wave and forever amen. If you'll ask us again, again and again. Oh please, Mrs. Mister, just ask us again.
Did I tell you about Rupert Scansion, the poet, you know? He has divine eyes and such sensitive hands. And he told me I was an old soul, a very old soul. He was alluding to my spirit. And he's coming to dinner tonight.
Oh, to dinner?
Cora, you're falling.
Cora, we're starving. Ask us to dinner, too.
Yes, do.
Oh, you poor boys. Well, I'll just have to eat. Well, that's all we're good for. We moneyed people will just use us, just step all over us. It was only for the good of the cause. Oh, speaking of the cause, I want you two to join my husband's Liberty Committee. You will, won't you?
Put us down.
And how?
But don't you want to know what it's all about?
Politics?
Cora, we are artists. And we love art for art's sake. It's smart for art's sake. To part for art's sake. With your heart for art's sake. And your mind for art's sake. Be blind for art's sake. And deaf for art's sake. And dumb for art's sake. Until for art's sake. They kill for art's sake. All the art for art's sake.
There's the car now. Robert. Yasha.
Give that some personal applause, and I certainly hate to follow it, even with someone like you, Howard.
It's a marvelous company, the present company. It's a wonderful one.
Well, I'd like to go back to the first company for just a moment. And there are no reflections on the present company. The present company wasn't around to any great degree.
A great number of them weren't born in June the 16th, 1937.
Well, actually, the worn-out words fantastic and fabulous may be applied to that particular opening night because it has become a bit of a fable in the theater, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. May I just tell you something? You know that Marc, having written it originally, finally gave it to WPA Federal Theater. I was on Federal Theater in the radio project called the Federal Theater of the Air, earning as a director $33.18 a week. And when John Houseman called me to ask me if I would like to be in a new play, I suddenly remembered that the actor's salary was $23.86. No dilemma. What was I to do? And I went up to John Houseman's house that night and met Orson Welles for the first time, all of 21 years old, and Marc Blitzstein. And Orson said something about trucks that were going to go back and forth, glass trucks and lightning and everything else. But Marc just sat silently watching me. And then suddenly he started to play the piano and beguiled me into singing, too. I am not a singer. And in a half hour, they said, that's it, you're Larry Foreman. And I went back and told the supervisor to get another radio director. That opening night, the 16th, was amazing because we all got to the theater. There had been rumors of cuts and rumors also that some people in Washington thought that the play was controversial. So we got there on the night of the 16th, and the theater was sealed. It was closed. The audience was all outside, this large audience, and we weren't to be allowed in. I was particularly bitter because, matter of fact, I was going to storm the barricades because my toupee was in my dressing room, and I was in love with it. Anyway, Will Geer and I sang songs out front. He sang songs. I was rehearsing the play still. And John Houseman and Orson Welles and Gene Rosenthal, the lighting artist who was helping Houseman at that time, found a theater, the Venice Theater, 20 blocks uptown, and corralled a truck and a car from somewhere.
Wasn't there a piano involved in all of this because you lost the orchestra?
That's correct. We lost the orchestra. There had to be a piano, and Jean had gotten it, I think, from her landlord, a piano. Anyway, they got it on the truck, took it up to the Venice Theater. Will and I led all this audience uptown, and on the way up, we gathered about 1,000 additional curiosity seekers, got up to the Venice Theater, and all the people stormed in. Then Marc and the piano were put on stage, and we, who could not go on stage because of a union legality, sat in the house. And as our cue came up, Marc never knew. He said many times whether he was going to have to sing the whole thing or not. But as our cues came, each of us walked to the edge of the stage and started. And that was the first time that it was given before a real audience. And it was a most exciting night in the theater, as you know.
Well, as I recall from having read about it, that theater really went on fire, and Archibald MacLeish had to get up and make a curtain speech.
Yes, he did, in a white linen suit, and I remember that. And but it was one of those wonderful electric nights in the theater, an immediate experience, and an experience that didn't need stagecraft or paraphernalia, just Marc on a piano above, and all of us just simply walking through and playing, which I feel more and more is the best way of really doing theater, especially theater that has power and fervor, as Cradle does.
I think it's been described as real theater rather than the fake realism that you sometimes find in the theater.
Well, that goes into the area of Marc's influence, particularly, you know, he dedicates Cradle Rock to Bertolt Brecht. And I've heard that he met Bertolt Brecht in 1935, played just the one song for him, Nickel Under Your Foot, and that Brecht said at that time, why don't you go into the whole area of prostitution and the area of prostituting one's sense of honor and principle? And I think that based upon that, Marc continued and worked on it.
Well, it's interesting that as you listen to the score, you hesitate to say a thing is derivative, but it's reminiscent of certain aspects of the theater, the music theater of Brecht and Weill, which was developing more or less concurrently in Europe.
That's true, but well, first of all, Marc was an unusually wonderful lyrical composer, and there's much of great melody in him, quite independently of people who speak about Kurt Weill's influence and so on. And also, there's about Marc such a passion, and he felt so deeply about his time that he was able to glean the essence from his time of all time. And that's why audiences find it as passionate and experienced today as they've done each time it's been revived.
Now, actually, the current revival is the 5th in New York, I understand.
That's correct. We've done it all kinds of ways. I was associated with these 5. At one time, Leonard Bernstein had the orchestra up on stage at the City Center. The next time it was done, David Hayes designed a full set, and the orchestra went down into the pit. I prefer it personally done as we're doing it now, with Gershon Kingsley at the piano and with a cast on stage coming forward to enact their scenes without the accoutrements of sets or costumes or any of that thing.
This is just a slight punctuation, but knowing we were going to have the fun of doing this with you, I went searching around town for a copy of Cradle Will Rock, and do you know that I went several of the best places where I might expect to find practically any play of the last 25 or 50 years, American play.
Yes, I know.
And I couldn't find it.
Well, that's a sad thing. I treasure my own copy, which Marc himself gave me. There's one happy thing, which is that Columbia Records is going to put out an album, which will be out, I think, within the next 3 weeks or a month, and so it will be possible for people to have the full play on records, even though they can't get a copy of the book.
And get back to that point that you made earlier about some people saying, well, the Cradle Will Rock was wonderful and exciting and so forth in its time, but it's a little bit on the dated side. I think what they're talking about is that nobody gets wildly excited now over the fact that we have, for instance, an AFL-CIO. There are a few people who get excited on one side or on the other, but by and large, this is behind us as a people.
Well, I think that although the specific elements may be a bit behind us, once again, the basic principles are with us. The basic principles of selling out one's principles, of safety in the face of pressure, of all of the ways in which people kowtow easily in the easiest way to kind of pressure, and others stand up valiantly, believing what they believe. You know, I'm one of those people who feels passionately about what others call the old chestnut, Cyrano de Bergerac. I find that thing that says, carrying aloft my white plume, is a classic, significant thing in the theater, and I feel that Cradle has facets of that, and audiences find those facets.
Well, now, I think the thing that hits an audience is that there is an excitement and sincerity in the Cradle Will Rock that lasts, that cannot be dismissed.
That's correct. That's correct. As a matter of fact, 2 of the songs that I think would be lovely if we did them now exemplify this. One of them is sung by Ella Hammer. Ella Hammer, who is called Joe Worker, and specifically, she is talking about her brother, who was pushed into a ladle for having participated in union activities. And it's a passionate, lovely song. The other is the key song in the entire work called Cradle Will Rock, which is sung by Larry Fong, the union organizer, and expresses itself.
Tell me about your turning to it as the actor-director rather than as the leading male performer this time. Did you find yourself wanting to get in there and
I always find
reclaim the toupee or something like that?
Yes, exactly. I always find that schism, that jealousy as an actor, and I always find it rewarding as a director to say, bless this new talent with all of the new performances, and all of our cast, this young cast, is extraordinary. Jerry Orbach, who plays Larry Foreman, is magnificent. Nancy Andrews is Mrs. Mister. Micki Grant playing Ella. And as you'll soon hear, it's a beautiful, pure performance. Clifford David and Hal Buckley as the artists in other scenes, which they do as well, are delightful, are funny and charming. It is the most gifted company I've ever seen do Cradle.
Well, this, of course, apart from The Cradle Will Rock, and I'm as eager as you are to hear both of these numbers. This is the exciting thing about the theater. Rogers in Me and Juliet had a number called The Theater is Dying. And the theme is that the theater is just not going to die.
It's not.
Then in the last thing that he did, the one he did all by himself, he did something with the orchestra that was looked upon as very new. He had the orchestra wandering around the stage.
In no strings.
Rather than in no strings,
yes.
Rather than down in the pit.
I'm delighted, by the way, Jim, apropos that, in what the current Newsweek describes of Cradle, in which it says that in the vitality and fervor and timeliness, we make other Broadway musicals look tired and tame by comparison, which is a lovely thing.
Well, I know there's nothing tired and tame in any of the members of the cast that are here with us on camera 3. So first, it's going to be Micki Grant in
Joe
Worker, and then Jerry Orbach and the company, as it were,
in Cradle Will Rock.
In The Cradle Will Rock. But first, the character Ella Hammer singing Joe Worker.
Story? Is that what your papers want? A story? Listen, here's a story. Not much fun and not much glory. Low class, low down. The thing you never care to see until there is a showdown. Here it is. I'll make it snappy. Are you ready? Everybody happy? Joe Worker gets gypped for no good reason, just gypped. From the start until the finish comes, they feed him out of garbage cans, they breed him in the slums. Joe Worker will go to shops where stuff is on show. He'll look at the meat, he'll look at the bread, and too little to eat sort of goes to the head. One big question inside me cries, how many bakers, peace undertakers, page strike breakers, how many toiling, ailing, dying, piled up bodies, brother, does it take to make you wise? Joe Worker just drops right at his work and he drops. Weary, weary, tired to the core. And then if he drops out of sight, there's always plenty more. Joe Worker must know that somebody's got him in tow. But what is the good for one to be clear? Oh, it takes a lot of Joes to make a sound you can hear. One big question inside me cries, how many frame-ups, how many shakedowns, lockouts, sellouts, how many times machine guns tell the same old story? Brother, does it take to make you wise?
We're middle class. We all got property. We also got our eyes open. This crowd here, hiding up there in the cradle of the Liberty Committee. Upon the topmost bough of yonder tree now, like bees in their hives, the lords and their lackeys and wives, a swinging rockabye baby in a nice big cradle. Then they remark, the air is chilly up there, the sky beetle browed, can that be a cloud over there? And then they put out their hands and feel stormy weather. A birdie ups and cries, boys, this looks bad. You haven't used your eyes, you'll wish you had. That's thunder, that's lightning, and it's gonna surround you. No wonder those storm birds seem to circle around you. Well, you can't climb down and you can't sit still. That's a storm that's gonna last until the final wind blows. And when the wind blows, the cradle will rock. That's thunder, that's lightning, and it's gonna surround you. No wonder those storm birds seem to circle around you. Well, you can't climb down and you can't say no. You can't stop the weather, not with all your dough. Oh, when the wind blows, oh, when the wind blows, the cradle will rock. Alone in their lap, easy wise, a swing and rock the fine baby in a nice big cradle. Then they remark the air is chilly up there, the sky beetle brown, can that be a cloud over there?
Marc Blitzstein's The Cradle Will Rock is currently at Theater 4, 424 West 55th Street. The musical director for the production is Gerson Kingsley.